The legendary Doug Foley, folks. Doug and I have known each other for the greater part of a decade. And Doug is one of those guys I'll call up on like a Friday night just to have an intellectual conversation with if I'm turning something over in my brain, because he always like pushes me, and he's also equally, like game to talk shop and have fun, just turning over a Rubik's Cube of weird business problems. And so what you're about to see is probably one of the smartest business brains that I know, particularly at that like weird 30, 40,000 foot level, where like we're talking about industry level stuff that's happening and world powers and things of that, macroeconomics, kind of freakonomics type of stuff. So I don't know if you knew that's one of the 16 ways I appreciate our relationship, is that I can call you and we can just jam on really weird stuff. But I love the fact that that's what it is. On that note, Doug is going to give you guys a consolidated version of those weird conversations with some sense of narrative, which will be great. So you guys are in for a treat. I don't even know where to credentialize or share about your professional background, because you've got a few plates spinning. Do you want to? I can muscle my way through it, or do you want to just walk through like the fun things you got going on? Is that cool?
Talk about identity and how much we struggle with it.
Cool. Sorry, it's not that I don't respect those things, just that I have a tendency to like meet weird people in the best ways that have amazing things going on, and so Doug is like in that awesome weird space. So that's probably one of the weirdest intros I've given today. We're going to roll with it. And yeah, feel free. Is it good? You can roam as much. Craig will keep up with you a little bit if you want to be off the stage too, since we're just a little bit. And if you guys want to just tighten in a little bit, or you can be, while we're being awkward. Yeah, come on in a little bit. I thought you were just a good student. Either way, yeah, you are. Awesome, guys. Well, I'll let Doug get started. We'll jump in. Connor, you need something?
Is this one working? Perfect.
Good. Rad.
I turned it back on.
Awesome, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Bo. When Bo asked me to be here, I was pretty excited. I'm happy to chat afterwards about any of those odd, weird things he said. Fortunately, I come from a family, I'm the youngest of 8, so I have just been exposed to a lot of things and picked on an awful lot. So been really fortunate. Now, 2 really amazing things happened during COVID. Number 1, I moved to Virginia Beach with my family so we could enjoy the beach. And number 2, the QR code made a comeback. So anything that you want, I have nothing to sell. But if you want to connect with me, you can scan that. I'll throw it back up at the end too. So that has everything I have. You can get a free copy of my book and just download it. If you DM me, I'll gladly mail you a copy as well. And I'll post it at the end too, so it'll be back up. Seeing as we're back after lunch, there's Any Given Sunday is probably one of my favorite movies, and seeing that we just came back to lunch, I wanted to share this to set the table because a lot of things I think we struggle with as entrepreneurs and business owners is our identity and who we are at our core. And it ends up clouding our ability to scale.
I look around, I see these young faces, and I think, I made every wrong choice a middle-aged man can make. I pissed away all my money, believe it or not. I chased off anyone who's ever loved me. And lately, I can't even stand the face I see in the mirror. You know, when you get old in life, things get taken from you. I mean, that's part of life. But you only learn that when you start losing stuff. You find out life's this game of inches. So is football. Because in either game, life or football, the margin for error is so small. I mean, 1/2 a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us. Hell yeah. They're in every break of the game, every minute, every second. On this team, we fight for that inch. On this team, we tear ourselves and everyone else around us to pieces for that inch. We claw with our fingernails for that inch. Because we know when we add up all those inches, that's gonna make the fucking difference between winning and losing. Between living and dying. I'll tell you this, in any fight, it's the guy who's willing to die who's gonna win that inch. And I know if I'm gonna have any life anymore, it's because I'm still willing to fight and die for that inch.
So, I mean, for me, just coming out of lunch, I figured one, that would help wake you guys up. But number two, I really identified that because for me, I think entrepreneurs, we kind of are always struggling to go for that extra inch or struggling through it. And you know, on paper, when I looked at who I was and I go through this, normally when I open this, I changed it for today because I wanted to be a little bit more honest with you and a lot more vulnerable. If you look at who I am on paper, and we set this up, and most of this was created when they were doing media pitches to launch my book, they started to go through and set up all these things that I've accomplished. But what they failed to take, you know, it looks pretty good. It feels like that scene from Ron Burgundy, like, come on, everybody, look how good I am. But the truth is, like, during that period, I had a lot of really dark periods. And this is, to be honest, this is the first time I've ever talked about most of this on stage. You know, I actually created my agency by accident. I didn't intend to build an agency. The truth is, I lost $83,000 in commission in a sales job I had in my early 20s. I was in $50,000 in debt. I had no idea what to do. So I would take whatever path I could to start making money. So a friend of mine said, hey, we're starting this real estate brokerage. Can you help us with SEO? And I'm like, yep. Can you help us build a website? I'm like, yep. Can you help us with ads? I'm like, sure can. So I would just take on anything I could because for me at that point in time in life, I was just trying to make money. I was trying to recoup what I lost. And for me, what I considered entrepreneurship was buying fast cars, flying private jets, like building this massive empire. And I was hustling so hard that I started to neglect the relationships that mattered. And the most important one was my wife. So building all these things, creating all these side hustles and lacking focus almost ended up in causing a divorce. I started to get really mad. And the irony is I have a podcast called The Happiness of Pursuit. But I was one of the angriest people on the inside. Like I hated things. I was snapping at my kids. I was yelling at my wife. Like I felt completely lost. And I started to think about that. When I saw that scene from Any Given Sunday, I started to think, you know, I think so many of us have an identity crisis. You know, we're so fixated on what our job title is or what it is that we do that whenever we have a major change, we start to lose focus on like who we are or the mission we're on. And when I came across this, how many of you are familiar with the Gartner hype cycle? If you haven't, look it up. It is probably one of the coolest trends for predicting what's going on in future. And they produce it every year. But when I saw this, I started to realize like, man, this feels an awful lot what it's like to start an agency. And it actually became a training tool that we started to use when we started to figure it out. So for most of us, we have this event right here, which in their case, they call the technology trigger. But for most of it, it's probably some type of life event. Either we got fired, you know, we hated the man and we wanted to start our own job, or we went to some seminar about starting a business opportunity, we took it. And we have this, you know, 12 to 18 month window where we start making all this money. You know, we start believing, hey, we can create this dream. And then we get to this point where it's like, man, I'm gonna start hiring people. Like I'm gonna build out this really big team, I'm gonna scale. And all of a sudden, all this cash starts dipping a little bit. We start feeling the stress of managing people, of managing a true business. And right about here is that break-even point. And somewhere between that 12 to 18 month window, all this money we started to have, all these things we started to accrue. So we started getting things like payroll. We probably bought a nicer car than we should. We get used to building this thing out. And then all of a sudden, this huge dream that we got excited with, we start to dip into the red. We start losing money. And it's at this point I started to realize, this point right here is where doubt starts to creep in. Like, why did I do this? Should I go back? Should I get another job? Like, where should I go from here? What are the things that I should do next? And if I looked at this, I think this stage here, for most of us, is where we really start to struggle with that identity because we associated it with where we are. For most of us right here, this is where we sit as a practitioner. This is where we're kind of learning those skills and we're perfecting some of the things that we've learned. And it isn't until we go through right here, this trough of disillusionment, where we really find out what we're made of. We start to understand and learn the true lessons that start to add value. This stage right here is when we move into becoming the expert as we exit. This is where we start to profit again because people now are benefiting from our expertise. They start to understand, like, hey, you've been through this. And what's been really cool about this conference is you've had so many people who've had these life experiences and they're now sharing them with you. So you start to understand and feel they've gone through what most of us are either about to go through. And we're able to benefit so you can accelerate through this. But we get to this awkward spot right here where we're trying to determine what roles you start to play in a company. And when you look at that plateau of productivity, and I start to look at it in the agency world, this is that stage where a lot of people get stuck. Because they have to start making the critical decisions and determining what is it in this actual stage that I need to do or the decisions that I need to make to figure out what team do I actually need to build. What is the company that we're going to start to create? What is that mission or the path that we're actually on? What we did here is very different than what we're going to do up here that's going to help us scale. Any questions on that so far? Good? Okay. So for me, when I went through this process, I had to do a lot more work on myself than I did on my business. And I had to truly realize that I had a lot of roles that I had and that they were consuming my identity. I was a father. I was a husband. I was leading an agency. The bottom line was I put too many things on my plate, but I had the inner conflict of what that meant for my identity. And I started to do a lot of research. I have a lot of friends who've exited the military and they struggled with PTSD. And I started to work with some psychologists and went through therapy myself. And one of the things I found, part of the reason that they struggle with PTSD was because of that loss of identity. A Navy SEAL grows up as a warrior. For years they're on the battlefield. They're constantly at war. They operate at such a high level. But when it's time to return to civilian life, because they've associated the identity to being a warrior, it doesn't really play so well, like in the grocery store or on the street. So they have to go through the process of reacclimating and figuring out what is it that they're going to transition to. And I came across this slide probably about 6 years ago, and it's called Ikigai. And the actual word, if you were to translate it, means your reason for being. And when I started to look at the correlation between the things and how they start to overlap, I really started to understand the importance of aligning who I was and what I was good at with some of the experiences I had to truly figure out where my expertise was best leveraged. That particular exercise of truly going through and understanding that not only allowed me to be a better leader within the companies that I ran, but it allowed our team and allowed us to start hiring the right people and putting them in the right roles. It actually allowed us to start scaling because we could start to align. I could actually be an emotional leader instead of just this angry person who was doing too many things. I would highly recommend like spending some time taking a look, doing some research. If you're not going to therapy, like I'll be honest, I used to think it was dumb. I used to think it made me weak. But going through that process and working on my mindset with somebody was probably the most profound things I did to get the resolution to start growing. So part of it, I was really fortunate in the episode number 100 of my podcast. How many of you know Tom Bilyeu by chance? So when he was launching his first podcast, Inside Quest, I stumbled across it really, really early. I heard him on another podcast. I started following him. So I was really fortunate to connect with him early. And because of that, I had connected with him, and I was filming the 100th episode of my podcast, and I happened to be in LA the same time. And I just sent a message to Tom, I've been a big fan. You've been a big help. I really appreciate what you're doing. Do you mind being on episode 100? I'd like to shoot it live. He's like, yeah, absolutely. Come down to the studio. We'll shoot it there. So the night before, like I was already as nervous as I get. I got a text from his receptionist, and they sent me an address for Mulholland Drive. So I looked it up just to figure out how long I needed to be there. And I just saw a residence, like I saw a house. And I thought she made a huge mistake, but it turned out that he actually built the studio in his house, which made me even more nervous. But in working with him, he introduced me to a principle called becoming anti-fragile. And one of the quotes he had said that stuck with me was, your values and your identity are what drive your behavior. And I think what you've seen throughout this, as we've had people speak, and I'm sure you'll see it tonight in the closing keynote, some of the biggest leaders who've built these companies, they've figured out how to associate like what they value, the mission they're on, and the identity they build. And one of the things that I see really powerful from that is as we've evolved and as the platforms evolved, they started to leverage social platforms and built a personal brand. So you get to see the living proof of that identity. You get to see like their belief structure coming through because the proof is in the pudding. Their behavior shows what they're thinking. And some of the work that you think about as you go through becoming anti-fragile is finding your purpose or finding your passion. And for a lot of people, this is really difficult. And early on in my career, I made the mistake of associating my passion with my hobby. One of the first things I did when I was in the stage of just trying to make all the money back when I lost my commission, I started a blog around hunting and fishing. And what happened over a 6 to 9 month window is I was so focused on creating content, I actually stole from my enjoyment of doing those sports. I didn't want to shoot it because that was what I used to actually like recharge. What I started to discover, and I did something really simple, and this is something you could do right now, is I grabbed my phone. Keith Ferrazzi, actually, I heard this tip on a podcast, used it, worked phenomenally. I sent a text to 10 people that I consider really close, like people I trusted, mentors, and simply asked them, what is that one skill that you think people value that I have? And I can promise you, not one of them said it was hunting and fishing. Every one of them came back with communication, marketing, teaching. And one in particular, still to this day, one of my most cherished mentors said to me, I'm shocked you haven't started your own agency. And it was in realizing that I started to understand like my true passion was doing things like this. It was helping entrepreneurs find their path, helping them build and scale their business. I like hunting and fishing, but my true passion was seeing success in other people. The second thing was taking intentional action, being very, very specific. The single most finite resource we have is time. Yet we waste a lot of it. Like it's really easy to waste. And it's funny, we heard Loss say yesterday, like he's now focusing, he wants to spend time with his family and his kids. And it's really interesting, the more you talk to successful people, you start to see this trend. They're moving away from the money. I'm not going to say it's easy to make $1 million. But I can tell you, if you had $1 million, you can't buy back your time. And I saw a really powerful post the other day from Brad Lee. And he had asked his followers a simple question. If I give you $1 million tomorrow, but you can't get out of bed. Would you still take it? Some people, him and high, so if I give $1 million, but you're not going to wake up, would you still take it? It was very profound to think about it, and that's what made me really go back and realize, like, time is by far the single most valuable asset that we have. So whatever you're going to do, be really specific about what you're doing and focus those actions on the things that you're passionate about. Focus where you can make the biggest impact, whether that's in your business or the people you're spending time with. The third was being intentional about the life and business you want. That's partly why, like, this really stood out to me, because when I first set out, and I think when most people set out and they start a business, they're not really sure why they're doing it. They just see the opportunity in it. They see the ability to make money. They see the ability to change their life, but they're not clear on what they want. And I had to go through the struggle of almost getting divorced, almost ruining the relationships, to really understand what I wanted life to be like, and then how to build the business I really wanted, and who I wanted to help along the way. For me, I kind of fell into it by accident. So I built a personal brand because I had this internal conflict. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I wanted to be or who I wanted to become. So I had launched a podcast called The Happiness of Pursuit. And my goal was to just interview entrepreneurs who I thought were successful. And I'd interviewed, I think at this point, almost 150 different entrepreneurs from all walks of life. People who owned Etsy shops, 3 different billionaires. And along the way, I started to learn those 3 principles I just shared. And what it started to do is change my mindset, and I started to realize how important the focus of impact was. And most people, when we build a business, like, most of it's self-serving. And if you really want to unlock the true potential of scaling something, you have to realize scale comes when you're serving a broader audience. And that message of service and understanding how to deliver that is when you can start to reach the masses. It's when you're going to apply your expertise to serve a bigger market. So when I started to figure out my identity, I really made the message to become an advocate for entrepreneurs. It wasn't tied to the things I was or the job titles I held, but more importantly on how I could make an impact and leverage what I've learned, or to connect other entrepreneurs to understand the value of it. And over that journey, I was fortunate enough to do a TED Talk this past fall to just increase that leverage and get the word out about how powerful entrepreneurship can be. Now, when I was a kid, I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't have any context as to what an entrepreneur really was or what it meant. But I was always enamored with Arnold Palmer. How many of you know Arnold Palmer by chance? That's more than I get normally. How many of you know he was actually the one that was the first agency to manage influencers? So Arnold Palmer, and the reason I call him kind of the OG social media influencer, is he actually had a following that was so intense, it was called Arnie's Army. He had realized that his attention and his ability to captivate an audience, and his audience was so big it actually got named. But prior to him, there was no real athletes that had that type of attention, especially in the golf world. You know, occasionally athletes would get some money for a cigarette commercial back in the 60s, but they weren't really understanding how much their attention was worth. So he actually founded the Golf Channel. So he realized that his love and his passion for the game of golf, if he could create a mechanism or a channel to distribute more of the content, then he could start to monetize it and share his passion with the world. He started to connect the thing that he cared about most and then just created the platform. And then he partnered up with his actual agent, Mark McCormick, and they founded IMG. IMG to this day, they're now called Endeavor, but they were the first agency to sign celebrities, sports athletes, and help them get contracts. To this day, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, LeBron James is actually a client of Endeavor, plus a number of celebrities. So most of where this started came from those principles, but they go back down to the root of finding that passion and being able to align it to build a platform. The platforms we use, whether it be TikTok, Facebook, they will come and go. But if you take the time to establish who you are, establish your identity and mission, it will help you move forward towards building your own platform, building your own personal brand, and then being able to transition to build whatever customers you want. And as you build that audience, there's a really good article from Kevin Kelly called 1,000 True Fans. As you build that audience, you start to build a mechanism, much like Arnie did with the Golf Channel, where regardless of what platform they build, that audience will follow you wherever you go. That's the mechanism to launch products, to build the things that you can monetize and ultimately make a bigger impact. I just wanted to leave you with one last thing. So this, you guys hear it all the time, but I don't think people take it to heart. If you go back and think about like how important the people around you are, that will often dictate the type of life you lead. It will dictate your identity. You are often identified by the people you surround yourself with. They will be the ones that push you. And I have to be honest and give both Alex, Bo, Bree a huge amount of credit, because all of the people in the rooms I've been in, all of you, like, it helps push me and raise the bar. It helps you understand how important it is to protect your circle and really develop the surroundings that are going to push you. It's also going to help you promote or make the impact you're trying to make. And I just want to leave you with one last quote, and this is the part that really stood out for me in this movie.
Now, I can't make you do it. You gotta look at the guy next to you. Look into his eyes. Now, I think you're gonna see a guy who will go that inch with you. You're gonna see a guy who will sacrifice himself for this team because he knows when it comes down to it, you're gonna do the same for him. That's a team, gentlemen. And either we heal now as a team, or we will die as individuals. That's football, guys. That's all it is. Now, what are you gonna do?
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Questions?
In building a personal brand, are there things that accelerated that you actually believe in doing? For instance, paying for publications, growing the social media following, or are you more on the camp of just be organic and it'll grow when it grows?
Organic growth, speaking, number one. Like, speaking by far was the single best thing that I did to grow my personal brand. But I think authenticity by far. There's a lot of growth hacks you can follow. And I debated, even I was talking to Bo about this, going into some of the things that we did. And there are experts in here who can far exceed, the specific tactics. But I think the single biggest thing that helped was just being authentic and building relationships with the people I wanted to. I can tell you, hands down, starting a podcast was by far the best thing I ever did. I learned more about myself and entrepreneurship and grew my network. My podcast is probably, in the last 5 years alone, responsible for well over $2 million in revenue. And it's mostly because of the relationships that I was able to develop. And there's no reason for me to have a relationship with a billionaire. Like, I did at the time, I didn't think I could add any value, but the real value I brought was being able to ask questions. And the good thing about billionaires, most of them like to talk about themselves. So I will tell you, starting a podcast is almost the best Trojan horse you could ever have to get in the room with people that you want to learn from. But if you do it inauthentically, you'll destroy the relationships and you can't scale at all.
How do you best, so when you're looking to grow your inner circle and you're at a certain point and you're trying to grow it to the next level with individuals that are kind of above and beyond your sphere, right? How do you genuinely start entering into those relationships and, kind of like without like asking too much, but also, that right amount of like give take type of relationship?
That's a really good question. I don't know if all of you heard it, so I'm going to try to paraphrase it. How do you move up that circle? And that's a really good question. And I think a lot of people get stuck there because when they look at their circle, it's the same friends they had from high school. And I'm sure a lot of you, if you go back to your hometown, you look around, you got that little group of friends who's still hanging out with that little group of friends. And a lot of them are in the same spot. So I think step number one is getting comfortable with, unfortunately, leaving some people behind. And that part can be one of the single biggest limiting factors is a lot of people are afraid to take the leap and move on past some toxic relationships or some limiting relationships. So step one, I would say, is realizing that. Step number two is getting really clear on the direction you're headed. You do a really good job. If anybody's an agency owner, you should talk to Josh about establishing a 3-year plan. His planner is really awesome for that. But getting really clear on where you're going and just finding ways to build relationships with people who are 1, 2, 3 steps ahead of you, you'd be amazed at the willingness of other entrepreneurs to help. It's just having enough courage to ask. And I can tell you, I made the mistake. If they give you advice, listen to it. Like, if they tell you something, like, don't go do the opposite. Like, them, chances are they're right. It's not to say you can't put your own spin on something, but if you ask advice, just listen. But it's amazing when you ask, like, take the moonshots. Like, chances are I'm not going to ask Elon Musk to be in my inner circle yet, but might try. But just figure out the people that are a couple steps ahead of you and figure out how to add value. And it's as simple as like, hey, I'd like to buy you a coffee. I'm trying to accomplish this thing. You've already done it. Jeff Hoffman, how many of you know Jeff Hoffman by chance? So he was actually responsible for helping found Priceline. And he's the reason you could print a boarding pass online and actually same software enabled like a digital ticket on an airplane. I reached out to him. I said, listen, I heard him on a podcast. He's probably the entrepreneur's entrepreneur. And I said, listen, I'm just trying to chart my path. I'm lost. I'd like some advice. And, now once or twice a year, I'll sit down with him for an hour or two. It just takes the time, and the willingness to ask, but you would be shocked at who's willing to help you. Yeah, but I wouldn't, when you talk inner circle, and I think part of like that inner circle and thinking about who you're around, a lot of it too should be considered your mindset. I know there's I think it's Stephen Covey, the 5 people around you. I think with social media being on all the time, we're constantly exposed to different messaging. Take that into consideration when you think about protecting your circle. Like, consider the things and the people like you follow, the type of things you watch. They will change your mindset. If you watch Fox News all the time, you're going to have one point of view. If you watch CNN all the time, you're going to have a specific point of view. If you turn off the news, you're going to be a better human by far, right? But like, take a look. Like, if you open up your Instagram right now, actually, do it right now. Just open up your Instagram real quick. Yeah. Thanks. If you scroll through it and the first 5 to 10 things are not the thing that you're trying to move towards, they are not the thing you're passionate about, they are not the things that's the direction you want to go, you're not protecting your circle. That's one of the biggest distractions you can make. Those algorithms don't lie. They are the most accurate thing you can possibly have. But that's the litmus test to understand, like, am I focused? Am I protecting my time and focused on the things that are going to move me in the right direction? Am I following the people who are going in the right direction, not distracting me from the goal I want to take? How many of you actually, like, when you scroll through it, how many were actually had things that were relevant to what you want? That's a really good litmus test. Mine's not. Mine's terrible, I'll be honest with you. I was bored for an hour, so most of mine's all jokes right now. And comedians. But really good litmus test to figure out what you want. The second thing is reading. One of the things that got me out of being like really stuck is I read over 180 books in the period of 2018 to 2020. Books are probably an unbelievable test. And if you go back, I'll caveat that. I didn't read them. I'm terrible at reading. I listened to them. So if you go back and take a look at like the last 3 to 5 books you've read, that's another way to figure out, like, am I focused on the things that's going to drive me, that's going to propel me forward? And same with podcasts. Like, are you looking into the information that's going to make you a better person? And the interesting thing, like, it's no different than a habit. You know, if you're trying to run a marathon and you have the daily disciplines of, you know, getting up, running, exercise, eating well, those same things tend to come through on what you're working on. But oddly enough for me, like when it came to creating a personal brand, I started to ask better questions. I started to see patterns in, you know, business principles, or when something was learning, it made me a better writer, it made me a better speaker. So I think that's a big thing to consider when you think about that, not just the people, but the byproduct of your environment. Like being in rooms like this, like, and around these people will make you better. Right now, I just started a position with an IP capital company as a CMO. All the companies that we're funding are making some type of sustainability change to the world. So that's my main focus right now. Still, I didn't shut down my podcast. I just do it a lot less, but it wouldn't have been possible had I not gone through and done all the things that I've done. I wouldn't have built the network I did to be able to do that, but that part's the most fun. Any other questions? Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
When you're going through that trough,
Yep.
what's something that really helps you speed through that with momentum? Is there anything that you like in terms of values or stuff like that?
There's 2 things to consider when you look at this trough. Everybody will go through it. And if you haven't yet, it's coming. Okay? Like, it is coming. It doesn't matter what business you want. And I will tell you, it is the best thing that will ever happen to you, because it's going to force you to rebuild your business. And the duration of those troughs will change based on what your business is. Now, some businesses will know that it's coming. They plan for it. So for those of you who haven't hit it yet, and you're fortunate enough, stockpile cash. You're going to need it. Like, there's a war coming for you. You're going to need that armory, so stockpile it. That's going to be the fastest thing, is having some cash reserves. Number 2 is knowing that it's coming, and understand, like, that's going to be a period of growth. In an ideal state, instead of it being, you just want it to be shallower. You don't want it to disappear, and understand, like, watch out for things like, is it a team thing? To get out of a trough, if it's specifically business related, these are usually the areas where you need to raise prices. And the front, like, and I went through it, I made the same mistake, but most people, they build a team right here. You know, that's typically why they tend to dip back down, but they don't raise their prices to accommodate for hiring. And as agency owners, like, right now is the single best time to raise your prices. Everything else is going up, right? Like, everything's going up. So now is the perfect time to figure out how to do that. And with the Great Resignation, we're also, within our holding company, so we have 6 agencies, over 240 employees, we're actually seeing a trend where we're starting to see the Great Reinstatement. We're seeing a lot of people who were agency owners, they went through this, they've hit the trough, and they're now coming back to work. So for those of you who are looking for good talent, there's going to probably be about a 9-month window where you have a lot of freelancers who really struggled through COVID and now are looking to come back, but they've acquired a ton of skills. They just didn't have the appetite to continue to do it on their own. So there's a really good sweet spot coming. So if you want to get out of that trough quicker, be ready to hire. And then be ready to replace yourself as a practitioner. So the faster you can move from a practitioner to an expert to a CEO, the faster you can move through those roles and the faster you can replace yourself in a system, the faster you'll get through it. How many of you actually are still doing the actual work within the company or delivery, right? So if you start to, and the natural progression is like you do some very tactical work, might be a media buyer, you might be an expert, and then you move to a consultant, right? Like you move from a specific title. That's those of you that are in that, I really want you to latch on to do not tie your identity to being a media buyer, or do not tie the identity to like a specific tactic. Like your insight and your thoughts will grow beyond that role. So just understand, like, as your expertise grows, and there's one really, really important thing I want to hit home. Everyone talks about a 7-figure business, or like scaling to 8 figures, scaling to 9 figures. A business doesn't have to be defined by like that ratio. You could create a really profitable business. And the cash generated and the profit generated can be used to fund other things. And that's where, like, I think there was a couple talks, or at least on the agenda, about passive income. If you can get a business that's really profitable, you don't always have to hire to scale. You may be able to replicate the process and procedures, or you may be able to figure out how to productize what you're doing and just continue to generate profit. And then when you do that, go talk to Chris. He'll help you structure it to make sure that you can generate a lot of passive income and protect it. Yeah. I'll be honest with you, like if you're just smarter about tax, it's a lot easier to preserve capital than it is to have to generate that same amount. So just, I think the 3 things: number 1, figure out where you are and how to move to the next one. Number 2, understand how to conserve capital and like switch roles. And number 3, just make sure you have a really smart tax strategy.
Good. I like that, invitation to move from a practitioner to an expert to a CEO. What guides are there out there for learning how to do that? Because like I'm at the first one, right? Like I am a practitioner and I want to move to the next step.
So if you were to think about it kind of like a doctor, I go to the doctor, the general practitioner, to see like my overall health. And if he says, hey, like I think there's something wrong with your brain, which my doctor says about me all the time, so does my wife, you go to see like a neurologist. So you have to understand, like, what is the specific expertise you can develop? And most of that comes from experience. And this is the one I always struggle with, because when I was younger, I used to get really frustrated. It was like, well, you need experience in order to charge more. And sadly, it's true. And so when you go from practitioner to expert, chances are you've either been doing something long enough or you've experienced something to have a greater degree of knowledge. And that's when they say you niche down. And there's 2 types of niches. Like you can go vertical, like I'm going to say, I'm going to dedicate into health and fitness professionals. And usually you'll have expertise in that industry. The other one is a horizontal niche. You can be an expert in a specific problem. It might be marketing automation. It might be developing or managing paid ads and social. Like that, one of those 2 will move you from a practitioner. And when you try to do it all, that's when you're more of the general practitioner, but being the expert. The biggest difference, like going to an expert to where you see like 6-figure consulting, it took me 10 years to get there. And I plotted a very specific career path in spending like a year or 2 acquiring really specific skills and then understanding the correlation of 2 things. So as you try to ascend, like to get to the higher and higher tickets and trying to move up that, if you want to stay in consulting as an example, figure out like how to be the true expert in one thing and then own the adjacency and then start to own the adjacencies to that. So for me, I started off like understanding SEO, which I don't know why, but we don't even do SEO anymore. We then started to understand like how the psychology of buying works. And then we eventually just started developing complete marketing plans. And we came across understanding the biggest gap for our industry was the gap between sales and marketing. And I didn't need to deliver a specific tactic. I needed to be able to solve the problems the companies have. So if you can apply like a very specific expertise and be the best at it to a really important problem in a specific industry, then you can move right out of the cycle and just command pretty much whatever you want. Does that make sense? What do you do now?
I am really good at making organic content. Started with my like personal channel, and now I do it for companies who sell products adjacent to my hobby,
Which hobby?
mountain biking.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
So-
so like like now my entire living is like I just make content, which I love to do in mountain biking, which I love to do, and companies will pay me for it. But like I'm doing all the work, I'm like contracting ambassadors, teaching them how to do better what I do. So it's just so much hands-on.
Dive a little deeper into the content creation for a second. You just said something. You teach other brand ambassadors how to create same content.
Right, yeah, so like I'll tell a brand like, hey, I'll get your engagement from 1% to 10% over like the next 5 or 6 months. And to do that, I essentially, I come in and I find ambassadors who align with the brand that already know how to make pretty organic or pretty engaging organic content. And I say, here are 5 things that you can do better as a content creator in exchange for giving them free product as a brand. So
Yeah.
I'm using the brand's free product to get them to make the content for me, which I then am paid by the company to boost their social media.
Okay. So when you're good, there's 2 exercises I'll give you like in terms of doing that. One, if the goal is like to increase the business or revenue, figure out the value of the problem you're solving. So the implication, if I doubled their engagement on social, what's the net result? Right. I'm not saying it's not a bad thing, and that is an area of focus, but try to correlate it. The higher you move up the value chain, the more valuable something is for somebody. So the value to the brand is at a certain level, but the value to the creators you're teaching, you're providing them an income source, or like you're providing them a $3,000 bike. So just understand the value chain. If you really want to figure out how to move up a value chain really quickly, there's an exercise called 5 whys. If you ask the question why 5 times, you will end up getting to the root of any problem, whether it's relationships, whether it's business. So if you want to move up the value chain, start to think for the brands, why is organic engagement important? Right? And chances are, well, we want to get in front of more people. Why do you want to get in front of more people? Well, we want our follower count bigger. Right? You're going to go down this chain, and eventually they're going to tell you the answer of what's really, really important in their business. And it's most likely going to be we'll sell more bikes, or we want to do a research study and figure it out. So once you understand like the core root of their problem, then you can start working towards like using your expertise to solve the bigger problem. That's where the money sits.
Dude, come on. Give Doug Foley a hand, everyone.